Oh, hey, there I am. I was trying to figure out what I was doing wrong. It's not hard when you understand that what you're doing. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us once again. This is David Oldham with We the Patriots USA. Um, and you can find us at wethepatriotsusa.org. Uh, we are here, week number 4. It has been a blast. Lots and lots of things are going on. And so we have a lot of things to talk about tonight. Tonight, we're going to discuss the hot topic that is going on and all of the things surrounding it. So uh, get strapped in. There's going to be a lot of information. And let me just warn you, it may not be what you want to hear, but it will be actually what things say. And there's going to be a lot of history with this and so forth. But we're going to be discussing war powers and the conundrum between the executive branch and Congress. And then at times, even the judiciary wants to get involved in all of this. And we've had some difficulties lately about that because the judiciary wants to get involved, and we're going to look at whether anybody is actually doing what they're supposed to be doing. And what do you think the answer is going to be to that one? um, but before we get started, just and please forgive my relaxed appearance. It's 82 degrees here in my office. My air conditioning isn't working. Here we are, beginning of March, and it's 80 degrees outside. The sun's shining through the window, and so it was all I can do just to stay warm. I've got the fan going up above me, so hopefully everything will be fine and it won't be too loud for all of you. But as we get started, remember what We the Patriots is. We are a public interest law firm, pro bono. Everything we do is pro bono to the end user or the ones who are actually getting the service. And it is your generous gifts that make this whole thing possible. And so if you can see your way clear to make a donation, either one time or a regular donation, if you can see your way to make a regular $25 a month donation, then you can join in on these uh, Constitution courses until we stop. And at this point, we just keep talking about whatever comes up because we want everybody to understand just what does it take to apply the Constitution in everyday life, because nobody else is going to do this for you. It's not being done by the media. I guarantee you, the supposed pundits who supposedly know all, don't have a clue. And so you're not going to be able to get this kind of information anywhere else, really. And it's not like I have all the information or Brian has all the information, but we're going to endeavor to dig in and show you more and give you tools so you can go find it for yourself. Now, tonight, that's what we're going to be really digging into. So, with no further ado, uh, we are going to get into our topic, war powers, and then the other associated powers that have been exercised and sometimes called war, sometimes not called war. It kind of like whoever's trying to get their message across is usually where they're going to choose their language, and they're going to call it war when it suits them, and they're going to not call it war when it doesn't suit them, and so forth. So with that, let's get into this. Let's share my screen here, and let's start with some Constitution, because it is most important that we remember that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. And we're going to start with reminding ourselves what all goes into the supreme law of the land, because it's not merely the Constitution, but there's some other stuff in there. We're going to look at that. Let me remind myself how I share my screen here. And all right, here we go. We are sharing the screen. And so, where we want to go in the Constitution to show that the Constitution is supreme over all other laws is Article 6. So if we go down here, if we go back to my website, constitutionalgrounds.com, you find the Constitution on the front page. One of the best resources ever. If again, remember, if you just hit Control F, which I just did on my keyboard, you find a search bar down the bottom of your screen. If you're working on a Mac, it's the little curly Q, the 4-leaf clover symbol instead of the alt key, or excuse me, instead of the control key. At least I believe that's what it is. But so hit Control F. You can type in whatever search phrase you want, and since this is all one page, the entire Constitution is actually laid out as a single page. It'll go through and search wherever that phrase appears anywhere in the Constitution. So if we wanted to look up supreme, we can see there's seven usages of it. And if we want to do supreme law, there it goes. It takes us right to Article 6. It's only used once. So Article 6, Clause 2, it says, this Constitution and the laws of the United States which shall be made in pursuance thereof. So laws which are made in pursuance of the Constitution and all treaties made, and remember this phrase because we're going to come back to it, or which shall be made under the authority of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land. And the judges in every state shall be bound thereby. Anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary, notwithstanding. In other words, everything else doesn't stand against the Constitution. So if there's something that violates or is not consistent with the U.S. Constitution, it doesn't stand. So, like I tell my legislators here in my home state, there are things within our state constitution, our Oklahoma Constitution, because I come out of the state of Oklahoma. In fact, if you wouldn't mind, maybe it's just the people that are in StreamYard, but if you wouldn't mind just typing in the state where you're coming from, where you're viewing from, it really excites me to figure out where our message is going. But I'm in Oklahoma. And so I have to tell our legislators all the time that there are things in our Oklahoma Constitution and in our statutes that are unconstitutional because they don't align with the U.S. Constitution. They actually are in direct opposition to the U.S. Constitution. And we've seen that in states like Minnesota and other things where they are actively, and Oregon, Portland especially, where they are actively working against federal agents who are actually carrying out federal law. Now, we're not getting into politics here. That's irrelevant, quite frankly, to this discussion. But while it may be politically motivated on their part, they are actively working against the supreme law of the land, and that's because the laws that the federal agents are upholding are actually constitutional. They're actually in pursuance of the Constitution, and therefore states don't get to say nope. We are going to fight. And then at one point, it looked like um, a governor was going to call out the National Guard to actually oppose federal agents, and you can't have that kind of thing. And so, again, politics aside, because we're not talking politics here, we're talking law and order, what the Constitution says, what the laws say. And so there are things at the state level that states actually can't do. They think they can do it. Hey, we're states' rights, that kind of a thing, but only when it's actually something that states are allowed. And there are things that have been taken off the table to the states. We can look at a few of those things, but not totally germane to what we're talking about, other than the U.S. Constitution, laws made in pursuance thereof. Those could be in either the state or the federal governments, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States. Now, key phrase here, treaties made under the authority of the United States. Now, that's a catchy phrase. It's actually a catch-all phrase. So a treaty must itself be lawful. It has to be constitutional, otherwise it's an improper treaty. We're going to look at some improper treaty tonight, and it's part of the reason we're having this discussion in the first place is because a treaty that the United States wrote and passed, I believe, in 1947, 48. Our Senate actually approved an unconstitutional treaty that we negotiated, and they had no right to negotiate it. And because of this, there are all sorts of ramifications, and we're going to go into that. So, part of the history lesson we have for tonight. Treaties are part of the law. It's why we have to make sure that the treaties that our government signs are themselves constitutional. And we should be pushing back because judges are supposed to be bound by these treaties. But remember, if they're unconstitutional, judges in those states are not bound by them. In fact, they have the duty to protect us from unconstitutional laws. If we were to have or unconstitutional treaty provisions, we would, if we were brought up on charges because we did something that violated an unconstitutional treaty provision, then we should have the out. The out would be when we get to the judge, we say, look, judge, this is unconstitutional on its face. It's unconstitutional, and therefore you got to let me out. You got to let me off. And the judge has the duty, as under the Constitution, he has the duty to uphold the Constitution rather than unconstitutional provisions. Now, we are going to be told, you will have heard this, that if we make a treaty, then that means that we are bound by it irrespective of its legality toward the Constitution. If the Senate ratifies it, then we're bound to it no matter what. It's one of the reasons that people have fought so vehemently the United Nations rights. It's the CRC. It's the something rights of of children or rights of the child or something like that, which has provisions that completely overturn our Second Amendment and doesn't allow guns in homes with children and things like that. And so while some nations have signed on to this treaty, the United States never has, never can, because it is directly violative, it directly violates our Constitution. So we can never do that. And quite frankly, if for some reason, a president accepted it and took it to the Senate for ratification. And, so the president signs it, says, okay, here you go, Senate, ratify this. And then the Senate looks at it because under Article 1, uh, the Senate has treaty ratification duty. And if they don't ratify it, it's not a treaty. It it goes nowhere. It's done. It's not a treaty. Nothing that we have accepted. Some presidents look at these treaties and apply them as though they've been ratified, and either they were ratified and have since been had their ratification removed. It's been overturned, or was never ratified. And some presidents will look at treaties that they negotiate and just start treating the various provisions as though they are ratified just by executive order, telling all the branches of the federal government to promulgate rules uh, as though this treaty was ratified. And so it's led to a lot of problems and a lot of court cases and court work through the years. So the Constitution is supreme. Judges are bound to support the Constitution and laws and treaties made in pursuance and under the authority of the Constitution. So now let's skip up here. Article 1, Section 8 gets into the various powers. Now, Article 1, Section 8 starts with the words, the Congress shall have power to. And then every phrase after that, it just says to borrow money, to regulate commerce. And so what it's literally Congress shall have power to do these things, to all of these different provisions. And notice in Clause 1, it says, the Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. But all duties, imposts, and excises shall be uniform throughout the United States. So in other words, nobody gets anything special over anybody else. It's supposed to be uniform all the way across the United States. So no, one state doesn't get a sweetheart deal over others and all the rest of the states. Those kinds of things. But what's it for? Provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. Now, we're not going to talk much about the general welfare clause, this clause right here, and what it means, because that gets into a whole story of its own and how it's been perverted. But note that all of our discussions so far have been that we are a republic, and that means that we are free people who have come together in compact with one another, and we are delegating some of our individual rightful powers to government. So collectively, that power is magnified by the entire number of us, those we hire, to then execute what we have delegated to them. Remember, I drew the analogy of a contract, like a contractor contracting for work, and there's a scope of work that's part of the contract. So part of the contract is, each side has particular duties. The one is going to provide work, the other side is going to provide funds, and then there's going to be laid out usually in an addendum, a sheet of paper that details what work is going to be done. That's basically what we are doing here with our Constitution, is we're laying out our scope of work. So this is one of the scopes. Congress can collect taxes. We got to pay them. We agree we're going to pay for the rightful things government does. And they've got to be looking out for our general best interest. That's general welfare. Defense. But if we don't have trade with the rest of the world, then we have problems. Prices go up. That's not necessarily in the best of our best of for our welfare. If we can't import, export, and so forth, not that we individually uh, are importing or exporting, because I'm not in the import export business, but I am in the purchasing imports and so forth, and I am in the business of supporting businesses that export as well as import. And so, I have these things, and I buy imports all the time. Um, Sometimes they're way cheaper than the stuff we get here in the US. Well, again, we're not going to get into that too much, but we all benefit from it. So, and we have to remember that because it helps us with our thinking as we go through the rest of this stuff. The general welfare is bigger than just an individual. I don't see how it affects me, so therefore I think I shouldn't have to pay for that. Well, we have to understand the bigger picture because we are going to be obligated for it. Just because we're ignorant doesn't mean our obligation goes away. Okay? That's what we're getting to here. So, we're going to be doing a number of things, speaking specifically with the Iran conflict. Um, we are looking at things like down here, if you go down to this clause, Congress has power to define and punish piracies and felonies committed on the high seas and offenses against the law of nations. So the founders knew that Congress was gonna need to do some more work and define and set punishments for piracies as well as felonies committed on the high seas and what happens with offenses against the law of nations. Now, the law of nations has changed through the years. Some people still call it the law of nations, and I'm not an attorney. I am not and certainly not a maritime attorney or somebody who's dealing with international law. And so I don't deal with these kinds of things at all. Just know they're out there. We're going to look at a couple of things because I just want you to see that Congress has taken these things up. Then we would just have to search out where in the statutes, in the federal statutes, it deals with all these different things. AI is becoming better and better at helping us ferret out all of the things that we might be interested in. But Congress has done all of this stuff. They have defined and set punishments for piracies and felonies against and offenses against the law of nations. We'll look at those here in a minute. Congress has power to declare war, grant letters of marque and reprisal, and make rules concerning captures on land and water. Now, some of these things are bygone eras, but definitely all things that Congress can do. Can declare war, grant letters of marque and reprisal. This is literally where Congress can give a letter to a privateer, an actual pirate, and then as long as the pirate carries this letter and works on behalf of us, of the United States, and abides by the final phrase, the rules concerning captures on land and water, then uh, then these privateers can go out and actually work in our behalf without being a part of the Navy or the Coast Guard. Instead, they can go out and do these things. We rarely use these anymore, as far as I know, but this is an old thing that all nations would do to help kind of supplement their navies back in the day. Letters of marque and reprisal. We haven't heard that term much. Um, Ron Paul used to talk about it back when we were getting into Afghanistan and Iraq and so forth. He talked about letters of marque and reprisal, a little different context, but same kind of a thing. But it says that Congress shall have power to raise and support armies, but no appropriation of money to that use shall be for a longer term than 2 years. Did you know that we only have a 2-year standing army? It can only stand for 2 years. That's why we have what's called the NDAA, or the National Defense Authorization Act, and it comes up every 2 years because of this clause in the US Constitution. Our founders were death on having a standing army that could turn against the people at will. And therefore Congress can cut off the power or cut off the funds for the army, and the army goes away. And one of that is it would only stand for 2 years, and then it sunsets, and Congress has to come back and re-stand it up, to re-raise it up, and re-support it. Otherwise, it's gone. That is a point I brought up in a speech I gave to a small local group here, and there were 2 teachers who had taught for 30 plus years, pulled out pocket constitutions. Some of them, a couple of them had constitutions that they had brought. It was a patriotic group, and then we had been giving out others, and they opened them up to see if what I was saying was actually in the Constitution, because they didn't even know it was there. They'd been teaching civics and things like that, government and civics and the Constitution for 30 years, and this was a point they didn't even understand. They didn't understand why Congress does things. Now, you know something that most Americans don't know. But everything I just said about the Army doesn't apply to the Navy. The Congress has power to provide and maintain a Navy. It's something that we do as regular. Now, it wasn't always the case. After the Revolutionary War, we turned our naval ships back into private ships to haul freight and everything like that. Come the War of 18, well, before the War of 1812, we had to re-raise another army or another navy. We'll talk about that in some of the history portion here in just a few minutes. Congress has power to make rules for the government and regulation of the land and naval forces, and to provide for calling forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections, and repel invasions. So that's what the militia is supposed to be used for. Uh, Congress is also to provide for organizing, arming, and disciplining the militia, and for governing such part of them as may be employed in the service of the United States, reserving to the states respectively the appointment of the officers and authority of training the militia according to the discipline prescribed by Congress. So there's training that is to be prescribed by Congress. Um, and then um, and then Congress has power to power over lands for the erection of forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings. So those are Congress's powers when it comes to the military. Okay. And so those are Congress's powers. Notice a lot of that is coming up with the rules, paying for things, declaring that there shall be a thing, an army, a navy, Um, the the whole declaration of war. In other words, whether or not we are going to declare war against another country, that is Congress's power to do. And the idea is it is a deliberative body. And therefore, with it being a deliberative body, it has a it is more inclined to look to what the people say and then debate it and come to a rational conclusion based on the mood of the people, as well as all of the other things that affect government that are supposed to be a lot less emotional, because we the people can be really emotional at times, and we might demand things, and then Congress is supposed to come along and go, well, but we can't pay for it. It's illegal. It's not constitutional what the people want. And in these kinds of things. And then they're supposed to debate all this stuff and come up with the right answer that's constitutional, that you know they can actually accomplish, um, and so forth. And so that's why that's why Congress is supposed to do these kinds of things. Now, a president, on the other hand, or a king, and our founders talked about kings getting whole nations into war. They didn't want that. Kings got people into war over, a petty squabble between a couple of kings. And those two want to duke it out. Rather than them go duke it out, they send armies against each other. It's like, why do we have to fight for some guy who's got a beef with another dude? Why do we have to fight that? We don't want that again. We had that with the 7 Years' War, the French and Indian War here in the United States. It was very nearly a world war, certainly a overarching war between European powers and all of their colonies, because they were all fighting over the colonial areas. And so fighting happened in those colonies, which why we fought over here. If it hadn't been for the kings of France and England, we wouldn't have had any problems. We had other problems, and we would rather have not had to deal with the French, and they're stirring up the Indians, who we were managing a peace, but then they got stirred up and so forth. But it was all because of two dudes over in Europe. It's not because of anything we did. We did nothing. But we had to fight for ourselves because we'd allied ourselves with at the time it was King George, but with the King of England. And so, you know, didn't want that again. And here we are. And why? Because the king can just make a proclamation and send people to war. We didn't want that. We're going to talk about this here in a minute, because we've gotten back to that. We've really gotten back to that. And Congress needs to take it up. Um, and this doesn't have anything to do with my personal feelings, because I'd like to help the Iranians. I would like to see the between 20 and 40,000 of them murdered for protesting what we acknowledge as a right here in the United States. They're getting murdered over, shut down. I don't know if you've seen any of the video of them using heavy machine guns on crowds of people. It's horrifying. And they're just mowing people down. I mean, it takes Tiananmen Square. If you're old enough to remember the Tiananmen Square incident, takes that to a whole new level, because the Chinese stopped their tanks in front of a guy. They didn't run him over. These people are just mowing people down with machine guns. Um, not even our Boston Massacre was anything of the sort, because these people are out there unarmed, and so forth, and that wasn't necessarily the case in the Boston Massacre, but we're also talking a different time era, and anyway, it just much smaller numbers, um, uh, and and one died that day. Several were injured, but one died in the Boston Massacre. I think maybe I'm wrong with the. Don't hold me to the history. If anybody's from Boston knows the history, correct me. But I know of one that died in the Boston Massacre, and and not 30 or 40,000. It was a volley or two, and that was it to break up a crowd. This is completely different. I'd like to see the Iranians free, and so forth. So that's my personal view. That has nothing to do with what we're talking about. Now it says in Article 2, the president. Remember we went through this. The executive branch is Article 2. Article 1 is the legislative branch. Well, it says that in Clause 2, it says the president shall be the commander in chief of the Army and Navy of the United States and of the militia of the several states when called into the actual service of the United States. So the president is the commander in chief. His job is to go by the laws that Article 1, Section 8 says Congress is supposed to set up, and he's supposed to run the Army and Navy by all of those laws. Here's his treaty power. He shall have power by and with the advice and consent of the Senate to make treaties, provided 2/3 of the senators concur. So there's your treaty power, where the president can make the treaties. He signs them, sends them to the Senate. The Senate 2/3 has to have a 2/3 majority to approve the treaty. But remember, that treaty must be constitutional. We need to be understanding the Constitution so we can hold our senators accountable for when they approve either treaties or laws. All of our Congress people, all of our state legislators, when they're making laws that are unconstitutional, we need to hold them accountable. And all too often, we don't, because we don't know this stuff ourselves. He shall have power to make treaties. He runs the ambassadors and so forth. So what we have here is the president shall be the commander in chief of the Army and Navy. It doesn't say anywhere in here that he can get us into a war or go and do something, unless Congress has, as part of his commanding the Army and Navy, he is actually carrying out what Congress has prescribed. So if he's carrying out punishments against the using the land or naval forces to punish piracies and felonies on the high seas, and captures land and navy and so forth, there are areas where Congress could come in and say, President, you can act without us making a declaration of war. And this actually happened. Now, I haven't actually looked into the history for quite some time, and I need to go back and do that. But this gets to our history lesson. Let's come out of here and share my screen here for a minute. What happened it was about 1798-ish, in that area. We had been, for years after our revolution, and even after we had gotten the Constitution signed, and George Washington comes in as our first president, and then John Adams comes in, there has been problems with our seafarers uh, in various parts of the world. And there was especially a problem in Africa in the Mediterranean. And especially where you get through the straits just below Gibraltar, where Spain comes down and Algeria comes up, and it gets really, really narrow there. If you wanted to go in there and trade either with North Africa or on up into Spain, France, Italy, Greece, and so forth, if you wanted any of those things to trade, buy and sell, import, export, all of that, you had to pass into the Mediterranean. Uh, the only way in at the time was by sea. The um, the Nile River didn't go all the way through. We didn't have the Suez Canal, and so there was no other way to get into the Mediterranean except through this passage. And the problem is that we had a major problem with the various caliphs and whatever they called themselves at the time of this area, because according to their religion, they could attack anybody who wasn't a Muslim because they were infidels, and that gave them free reign. And so they had their privateers, their pirates, go out and attack all these things, and then they would come back and they would protect all these pirates and share in the wealth of all the goods that were stolen. And it had gotten to a point that we were able to make payments to a lot of these people, a lot of these caliphs, where they would just get money. And rather than having their privateers go out to get their money, we would just pay them. And so we were paying. George Washington paid these people. Um, uh, John Adams started paying these people. And the problem was it got more and more and more expensive. And pretty soon these people were demanding more and more and more money. Oh, wow. I'm seeing where you guys are from. Thank you for putting that stuff in. This is awesome. Um, the the problem was that they just started charging more and more and more, and it came down to all of a sudden we had a calculation to make. And what they realized, and this is under John Adams, Thomas Jefferson was part of the discussion. Thomas Jefferson was vice president at the time. And remember, at the time, politically, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, who became really tight friends later on after their political careers, um, best of friends, died on the same day, uh, July 4th, 1826, the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. Um, but they were so tight. They were such uh, at this point in time in about 1797, 1798. They were really at odds with one another. But this was something that brought them together, and that was, we now are paying out so much money, it would actually be cheaper to raise up a navy, to fund it, to build the ships that were necessary to go over there and start clearing the waters of all these pirates, even go so far as to create a marine brigade or whatever size it was, kind of like an early Green Berets, and have these Marines go over train the indigenous peoples, find someone who's willing to defeat these bad guys who are in power over there and defeat them and be friends of us and agree to knock all this stuff off. And that's exactly what they did. And if you can hear remnants of this history in the Marine Corps hymn. And so, the phrase "from the shores of Tripoli," that is reference to this very thing, because the Marines went to Tripoli at this time. It was about 1800, just before Thomas Jefferson came into office, and then it continued under Jefferson, uh, where we sent these people over and were clearing the Mediterranean of all of these. At the time, they were Arab pirates, Arab Muslim pirates, and then anybody would be a pirate because they would just be under and pay tribute to the leaders who were giving them safe refuge. Cleaned them out, got the worst caliph, the big guy, uh, got his brother to raise up an army of a couple of others. There were two or three uh, groups that all came together. They didn't like each other so much, but when you've got a bigger thing, even the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and we did that kind of a thing. Got them all to work together. They put him out, and all of a sudden, the Mediterranean just became quiet, and we didn't have to pay out all this money. Very small amount just to keep everybody happy and that's the way it worked. Well, these kinds of things go on and work, and now we have a problem with Iran. We have Iran, who threatens to close the Straits of Hormuz, the busiest waterway for oil trading in the entire world. And I can't remember the numbers. It was 40 or 60% of all of the world's trade by ship of oil passes through this this strait, and Iran would threaten and close this stuff off, affecting all of us, affecting the entire world, and the price of oil would fluctuate, go way up, and so forth. We've even noticed since this whole thing kicked off that the price of gas has gone up because of all of this. The trade can't happen while hostilities are going on. It's a lot harder, and so prices go up. We hope that it'll be very temporary, and then they'll drop right back down to where they should be. But so, little history lesson there. The Navy was being used to do the very kinds of things that that we're talking about doing um, in Iran somewhat. It's a loose it's loose a loose comparison. Now I say all this because, and admittedly I have not read the congressional approval for paying for the Navy and whether or not there was any direction as to how Adams and Jefferson could use their Navy, and whether or not their Navy, whether or not there was any sort of a declaration of war. I believe, I I'm 95% sure that there was no declaration of war against anybody over in North Africa. Rather, we stood up a Navy and said, go get it cleaned up, basically, and left the details of the how to the commander in chief. And that's what happened. Now, I bring this up because this is kind of the tie to what's going on today. It's amazing how when you see political figures, at times they want, a hardcore declaration of war. Other times, because it doesn't suit them in their political interests of the moment. So people who are crying now for a declaration of war didn't cry for it when their guy was in power and was doing the same kinds of things, and vice versa. I mean, it's no side is good on this sort of thing. Um, there are some who are consistent throughout, and as a constitutionalist, I would like to see Congress taking up the declaration of war a whole lot more than they have. Now, there is another tidbit of history that is, did you know that since 1987 or 1947, there has not been a declaration of war, and we've been in lots of them. There has never been a declaration of war. I'm going to share with you a reason why. And that means I've got to share my screen again. And let's go right over here and look at what we call, I got away from it. Let me show you how I do some of my searching. So I've just typed in declaration of war under UN treaty. And we're going to look here for the AI. But the UN Charter actually forbids the actual declaration of war of one member to another. So if we don't say we're at war, then we're really not at war. We're just working things out. But under the UN Charter, which is a treaty, everybody who's a member has signed on to the treaty. This is why I've been talking about treaties, and I set you up for all that talk about treaties. A declaration of war under UN treaties is largely obsolete due to the UN Charter, which prohibits the use of force except in self-defense, or with Security Council authorization. So remember when we went into Iraq and all of the stuff and the testimony Colin Powell went to the UN Security Council, and all of that was to get permission of the Security Council for coverage to go into Iraq. That's why we had yellow cake uranium. They're trying to buy this stuff. It's an imminent threat to the United States. Give us permission to go in. It's for our self-defense, and we're taking preemptive action. So we want Security Council cover for all of this. That's why they did it, because it was required under the UN Charter, the treaties that make up the UN Charter. Now, because of that, nobody declares war with each other. They just go. Russia didn't declare war against Ukraine, didn't declare it against Georgia or Chechnya or any of the other places that they have gone into in their area of the world. You just don't see anybody declaring war anymore. You had a kind of a thing with Pakistan and Afghanistan the other day, but I don't believe that was in any way formal. It was just an official declaring we're at war. We don't like what they're doing. We're at war. It's open war. I don't think it was anything. And if anybody knows, let me know that it was anything formal. Again, they're sitting members of the uh, UN, so they have to sign on to the UN charter. So they can't. So they don't. It doesn't mean that they're not doing the same old, same old. It's just semantics now. But that's part of the reason. This was all the UN was set up in 1947. Funny, since 1947, we haven't declared a war, not in the constitutional sense. It's not going to happen. We've had Congress fund all our military expeditions, our police actions, and so forth. And because of the fact that Congress has signed on to the UN Charter through the treaty making power, that they signed something that actually takes away, if we're going to uphold the UN treaty, then we are saying, okay, we're not going to do the declaration of war thing in the same way. So they haven't. What that has led to is presidents, just under their commander in chief status, utilizing their authority as commander in chief to send the army, to send the navy wherever they need, and just do stuff. Little more history. 1948 comes along, and we send troops into Korea. There's a fight in Korea over communists wanting to take over and free Koreans wanting to fight the tyranny of communism. And of course, we joined the side of free Koreans, and the communists were obviously supported by communists. And but we went in. They had to think of how would we do that? We didn't declare war. We did it just a few years ago in 1941, just 7 years before we went in and declared war against Germany and Japan. Why didn't we do that here? Well, we've got this new treaty, and so they called it a police action. It was under the auspices of the UN. And if you read any history about the Korean War, it was very much a UN, not only sanction, but countries from around the world were fighting on this thing on various sides, but especially the side of the free Koreans, because they didn't want, or we had gotten permission to go in because to help them, and anyway, a lot of reasons we went in. Truman sent us in, and so we go in, and then get out. 52, 53. We make a treaty, or a ceasefire agreement, which is still in effect today. The war's never been ended. That the Korean conflict, the Korean War, the Korean police action is what they called it, has never actually officially been ended. And that's why there's that town on the line where they have those buildings and so forth, and it's got troops on either side of the little town, those buildings, and they guard it, uh, and so forth, because and at times point guns at each other. Nobody made a shot for years and years and years, but I think since back then. But there are times that things like that go down. All right, so Korean War comes up. Similar thing happens in Vietnam. Again, call to police action. Um, again, somewhat run through the the UN. Now, again, both with the Korean War and the Vietnam War, and we're going to call them wars here. That's what they have become known as. Um, can we call them wars if they weren't declared by Congress? Well, Congress funded them both to the hilt. Came a point in time in the Vietnam War that people did not like what was going on, and the mood had changed, and Congress started wanting to get out. And they were having trouble getting from LBJ or President Johnson, and then later President Nixon. They were having problems getting all of the information they wanted. They were having to give money for things they didn't necessarily want. Well, what they did was they created what's called the War Powers Act. And I wanted to look at this real quick because this is an act that was created to try to rein in the problems that Congress had created for itself by participating in the UN. And I'm not saying we shouldn't, but participating in an improper treaty that literally took away congressional power. Congress had led itself into a conundrum. Well, the only way we can actually get something done and protect a vital interest or whatever, we were at the time. Remember, we were fighting communism. The problem is we weren't fighting communism correctly. It's an ideology. We need to fight it ideologically. We never have properly fought it ideologically, and instead we were fighting it militarily. And we saw that as an imminent threat to the U.S. because if it starts spreading around the world, all of a sudden we're going to be the lone free state, as it were, filled with communist, Marxist nations that are going to all join together in a big economic bloc, keeping free states from participating and thereby shrinking our ability to do what we have always done and stood for, fought a couple world wars about, and so forth. And so we decided we were going to fight communism militarily. Well, how is Congress going to do that now that they've given away their power basically by participating in the UN and allowing for that, and allowing for their declaration of war power to just flitter away? Here comes the War Powers Act. Now, there's a couple reasons for it, but the big one was they weren't getting information from the executive branch about the war. They were getting it was coming in dribs and drabs. They didn't like what they were learning from the news, who were the news reporters who were covering the Vietnam War and so forth. So in 1973, the War Powers Act was enacted. Now, it was designed to limit the president's ability to engage in military actions without congressional approval. And so he might be able to do something real fast if needed within some rules, but then he was going to have to come back and report to Congress and within a particular time frame, and then Congress would decide whether or not they were going to continue the thing or it was going to die. At which point he had the duty to get everything out. Get out our people, get out of from under the conflict. And the problem is and this is the problem, is if you allow the president some latitude, then how do you get out from under when you've gotten yourself under? If you get yourself under, how do you get out from under without more support? And so again, it's more bad rationale, bad thinking. And I wanted you just to see it. Here it is. It's in Title 40 of the Federal Code. This is the House.gov. This is the United States House of Representatives, and this is uscode.house.gov, where you can find the updated code codified in this way. There are a couple of different ways the feds codify everything and catalog it. This is the easiest to use and the kind that we would be most familiar with. So Title 50, Chapter 33, the War Powers Resolution. Now it says here in the purpose and policy that this is that the constitutional powers of the president as commander-in-chief to introduce United States Armed Forces into hostilities or into situations where imminent involvement in hostilities is clearly indicated by the circumstances are exercised only pursuant to 1, a declaration of war, 2, specific statutory authorization, or 3, a national emergency created by attack upon the United States, its territories or possessions, or its armed forces. Now, you'd have to look into what we're using for this one. I believe they're using 3, a national emergency created by attack on armed forces, possessions, things like that over in the other areas. There may be a statutory authorization. I don't know what areas, and I haven't paid attention to what areas the administration is using to go over and attack. But those would be things that the Congress was supposed to look into. Congressional legislative power under necessary and proper clause, Article 1, Section 8, specifically provided that Congress shall have the power to make all laws necessary and proper for carrying into execution not only its own powers, but also the other powers vested by the Constitution in the government of the United States. So they just say that's where we find our power to do this. And that's absolutely true. And they claim that this was the purpose of this chapter was to fulfill the intent of the framers and ensure that a collective judgment of both the Congress and the president will apply to the introduction of United States armed forces into hostilities or into situations where imminent involvement in hostilities is clearly indicated by the circumstances. Okay, so this is the purpose. This is what they say the purpose is. Now we go into consultation and initial and regular consultations. The president, in every possible instance, shall consult with Congress before introducing United States Armed Forces into hostilities or into situations where imminent involvement in hostilities is clearly indicated by the circumstances, etc. Now, what they did was they at least announced, if not consulted, and I don't know how much consultation with Congress was done, but due to a lot of negotiating between the executive and legislative branches of the federal government, back when we were going into Iraq and Afghanistan, they came up with basically you're going to let the top people in the government and in the Congress know. So you're going to let the leaders of both parties in both the Senate and House of Representatives. So you're going to have the speaker and the leader of the majority party. You're going to have the majority leader and their deputy of the minority party in each house, basically let them know what is going on. And that was done. At least a a call was made, an attempt to reach out and tell these people we're on this. Now, how much was done in the days and weeks leading up to all of this? Nobody knows because it's all kept hush hush. Of course, now because it's political, we hear nothing was ever done. And then you hear, oh, yes, it was. We have records of all these meetings. We've been talking about this for months. Don't say that we weren't consulting. Now, was it proper consultation under the law? All of Congress or just a few heads of Congress and all of that? If that's your bailiwick, you need to look into it. Just keep reading into the statutes. You'll find it. And then we get down here reporting and so forth. Reporting requirement. Um, report anyway. There's just more all sorts of stuff. One of the things that one of these areas says is that the that the incident or that this would all apply from here on out, but there would be reporting requirements now on the let's see if I find it right here. I can't okay. Yeah, it's not this section. Anyway, it mentions the Vietnam War. It says the current conflict in 1973 is the way it phrases it. But basically, what they were trying to do is in 1973, they're trying to take away Nixon's ability to prosecute the war and get us out. Now Nixon wanted to get us out. He signed the law. He wanted to get us out. He wanted Congress to take it back over. He wasn't necessarily as upfront with Congress as he could have been. But basically, it says the president shall submit within 48 hours to the Speaker of the House of Representatives and the President pro tempore of the Senate a report in writing setting forth the circumstances necessitating the introduction of the armed forces, constitutional legislative authority under which such introduction took place, and the estimated scope and duration of the hostilities or involvement. And then there's other things that go into all of this, but they have to lay out the case right up front. Uh, the war powers was really meant to end the Vietnam War. And that's part of the reason they did it the way they did it, because the president already had exercised those powers. Now they were going to try to claw some of those powers back. And in so doing, find excuse to cut off the funding and demand that we get out from under in Vietnam. And that's what happened in 1975. We pulled out. Um, and as always, there's no such thing really as a fully clean pullout, especially when you're not doing it under your own, when you're not in control. Either you don't allow it or circumstances, the war gets away from you, and you have to pull out under the gun, as it were. Bad things happen. We saw that just a few years ago in Afghanistan. Again, we saw that where basically we did it to ourselves. We had it where we could have gotten out without any problems, but that's not the way it went down. Sadly, um, I think we could have done a few things to get out from under a lot easier. We didn't get out because of the war powers. We got out because of presidential action. I like that on the one hand, but again, I can nitpick on that, but that's me personally. Sorry. So there we have it. You can see that the war powers, it goes through the whole thing. There's the War Powers Act. Title 50. Title 50 is, let's go up here to the beginning, war in national defense. This is also where you find things like the militia is the National Guard. When in and then in how they are put into federal service. Um, you can find the legal definitions created by Congress and the punishments for insurrection and so forth. This is just about war. Now, there's some other things that have been used for some of the other events that have gone on where the president has used the Navy for some things. Uh, things like piracy, excuse me, and privateering, um, where there's some of that has gone on. We've used that for the Houthis, Somalians, the pirates in Somalia. We've got the uh, some of the things that Iran has done, I believe. These statutes. Title 18 is the criminal statutes where crimes are defined and punishments are are also defined for said crimes. And so here under chapter 81, you have privacy and privateering. And so you can see if you are here's piracy under the law of nations. Whoever on the high seas commits the crime of piracy is defined by the law of nations. So it refers to the law of nations and is afterwards brought into or found in the United States shall be imprisoned for life. Of course, got to have your due process, go through court. Now, that could be a maritime court, could be a naval court, depends. Haven't looked into all of that to see where that all transpires, whether it is a military tribunal or whether it is a regular federal civilian court. Here is if citizens, U.S. citizens, act as pirates, then you have aliens acting as pirates. But notice, shall be imprisoned for life, shall be imprisoned for life. Arming or serving on privateers shall be fined under this title or imprisoned for not more than 10 years or both. Arming or serving on privateers, privateer is the ship. Um, and so if you're arming the ship or if you're serving on the ship, unless you could prove that you were serving against your will, you would be facing 10 years and fines. Assault on commander as piracy. So if you take over your ship, that could be an act declared piracy and so forth. So we've seen some things, Venezuela and so forth, were basically declared felonies on the high seas. And so bombing of boats happened, those kinds of things, and piracies could be excuses as to why the Navy is doing what they're doing over in the Straits of Hormuz. Because, hey, country, you don't have a right to stop another country's ships just because you wanna, because you declare the whole straits closed. The rest of the because you declare it, the rest of the world has to come to a stop. No, 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 no. We say we would declare you're acting as pirates, though you are in a navy. You are acting as pirates. These are acts of war against the rest of the world, and therefore either as pirates or as an act of war we can act against you, and therefore the president would probably be acting under some of these kinds of things, and as commander-in-chief of the Navy could then have the Navy uh, sink 43 boats. That was the last count I'd heard. 43 ships uh, basically sunk the Iranian Navy. um, because if they're doing that, they're committing acts of war against everybody. They're acting as pirates. They would have to take these ships into their ports or sink them. Um, Not anything that would be lawful. They're not acting. The Iranians would not be acting with Security Council approval under the Iran or the UN Charter. Why? Because we would certainly veto it, not allowing them and as a permanent member, a veto of a permanent member vetoes the whole thing. And it's got to be unanimous on the Security Council. So without it being unanimous, it's gonna, and especially among the five permanent members of the Security Council, and so therefore you are looking at um, Iran doing what they're doing without UN approval, as we saw the UN Charter requires. So don't know exactly what authorizations, what justifications the the administration has chosen to use. And it doesn't mean that they're necessarily wrong in the ones that they choose. They might actually have more justifications than they have chosen to use. We saw this in the recent Supreme Court decision that came down. Let me get out of here. So we saw this with the recent Supreme Court decision where the Supreme Court told the Trump administration that what was the thing that they couldn't, oh, it was the tariffs. They couldn't enact the tariffs on using the statute that they chose, and then unusual for judges who never give legal advice from the bench and usually have a you know a bar against it. Brett Kavanaugh, in his dissenting opinion, cites a whole bunch of statutes that these could work, and, and within a couple of hours, they have pivoted over to other statutes that he had pointed out, whether or not one came to it before or whether they had already known about it. They were already planning to pivot if it didn't go for them. It's there. Oftentimes, there are lots of ways to get to skin the cat, as it were, or to get to the end result that you're looking for, and that ultimately comes down to we're using the Navy. It is very similar to how the Navy was used in 1798 to 1802, 1803, in that period. The Navy was paid for, sent out to generally clean things up. That's generally what we use it for today. Um, and again, if you want to get into the weeds on this, you can do that. But I think this should help give some insight to what's going on in Iran. Now, should we have more congressional discussion about the use of military force, and rather than having the president just use it as a tool for negotiations? It could still be a tool, but it means that the president has to get Congress on his side for the negotiations before he goes and does it. Is that more the way we want it to work, or do we want it to continue being the way it's been going? See what I'm saying? These are questions that are political in nature, and we as a people are going to have to decide these things. Do we want, as we the people, do we want Congress to have to declare war before any action is taken by the president? That could be dangerous. Well, not really, because even the Constitution allows for repelling of invasions. But what if, with the whole nuclear football and all of that kind of a thing, um, what about those kinds of things? And what do we do? I mean, we're going to have Congress meet every last time we make up any decision for anything, or are we going to continue with this more? Here, we've given you a bunch of money, use it as you see fit, um, according to the other rules we've set up. Those are the questions. I think that we don't have near enough. I think that the UN treaty should be uh, reviewed. I think that President Trump, with his Department of War and talking about this, has kind of raised this question. Um, and I think it may be part of what he has intended to re-raise this question and have Congress be more jealous, more zealous for its powers and taking them back, clawing them back from the executive and judicial branches where they've let it all kind of go. I mean, look at all the rules in the executive branch, all the regulations, they call them regulations, but all the rules created by the executive branch, enforced by the executive branch, and and to your detriment, if you don't give in, then until the Chevron deference um, rule, the Supreme Court was just going to not let you get off. You were sunk if you didn't follow one of these rules, even though they're nowhere found in statute. Um, Congress delegated powers to these branches. Same thing has happened with the military and so forth, and they've just kind of let the military go. Well, if Congress starts taking back their rule-making power and their declaration of war power, their various powers that they can control, they just have to take it back. If they would do that, then things would look different. Whether it would ultimately end up being different, whether it would work out for the better or not, remains to be seen. Maybe there could be some historical arguments about whether or not that's a good idea. But remember, and I don't have the numbers, but in our 237 years, 39 years, 37 years, excuse me, of existence as under our Constitution, um, we have um, we have declared war only a handful of times, and all the rest of the military actions, and we have them. If you go do a search, you will find we are having them regularly for the 230 years, 237 years. We have had military actions without a declaration of war repeatedly. In fact, the vast majority of all military actions taken by all presidents have been without a declaration of war. There's less than that number of declarations of war in 200 years. Fewer than 10. I think the number's 7. I could be wrong. Somebody want to look it up, that would be fabulous. But I believe it's less than 10. And all of the rest of our actions, and we are taking actions virtually every year for the last 200 plus years, all but 10 have been done without a declaration of war. So there's so much precedent for the way it's been going, and there would be so much history that we'd have to figure out the right way to accomplish it, to get it back and have Congress actually take it over, because Congress has just allowed this stuff. They've paid for every one of these things. All of these actions Congress has paid for. They've never withheld funding from um, the various forces that were doing all of this stuff. It didn't used to be that we had basically a standing army. I mean, it's a done deal. Every 2 years, we're gonna have money for the military all over again for those that have to be re-upped every 2 years. Everyone but the Navy. And Marines, remember, Marines are part of the Navy. So Navy and Marine Corps ride this throughout. But everyone else, that would be Air Force, Army, Space Force, and so forth, every 2 years um, has to be reappropriated. We didn't used to do that. We had a very small army. Still had to be uh, reappropriated. There were periods where we did not have a standing army, um, but we generally had a little bit of something going on. Generally, I haven't looked into the history of this, but there are times when we had a really, really, really small army and then had to build up real fast. Remember when before World War II, we had such a tiny army. It was after the Indian Wars. We didn't even have a big army then. But after the wars with all the American Indians, again, never declared. They were tribes. I mean, who are you going to declare war against? We didn't have a nation really to declare war against. But after those wars, our army shrunk even more, and they had trouble going into Mexico after Pancho Villa had attacked some towns in New Mexico and Arizona. They had trouble going into Mexico to chase him down. I mean, we were just it was really bad. And then all of a sudden, we had World War One, and we had to have a draft in order to get up to size and get bigger. Our standing army, the size it is, didn't happen until after World War II. Before that, we always had a very small army. World War One, after that, it started growing. But then World War II came along. We had to have a draft yet again to get to the point where we had enough people to actually fight that war. We may have to do it if we had such a big conflict now, but everything we did in Iraq and Afghanistan was all done by volunteers. There were no conscriptions. Okay. And so anyway, that was, I hope that answers some of your questions. It might make it a little more muddy, the waters, but I'd like to see your thoughts in the comments, because I do see we have people from around the country who are watching. Um, See your questions and so forth in the comments. Um, what kinds of things have I not touched on that you still have questions about? Did we look at enough Constitution? Did we see how the Congress had carried into effect what the Constitution said into the statutes? Um, and then where they defined like the crimes, the felonies and the piracies and their punishments, we saw that, and so forth. What kind of things would help you to answer anybody on any side of the political question that's out there about the use of force, um, and especially over there, because it's not like they are here. And I see somebody's got a question. Let's see. Okay, let's look at this. I have a question about last week. What is the difference between people and person in the Bill of Rights? Why does the Fifth and 14th Amendment use person and all else use people? Excellent, excellent question. So be thinking about your questions, guys, as we start to wrap up. But let's take a look. And the answer is there is no difference. The difference is people is plural of persons, um, uh, is the plural, if you will, and person is the individual. So let's go and take a look at the Constitution again. Let's look at the Fourth and Fifth Amendments, especially because of the importance of both of those. So right here, let's just scroll up to the top. And here we are. Let's look at the Fourth Amendment. So the Fourth Amendment says the right of the people to be secure in their persons. So people is all of us. The right of us to be secure in our persons, if you will. Our everything that makes you up as a person. Okay? You have the right to be secure in that. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated. And then it tells, unless, and that's not a violation, but it shall not be violated. Warrants shall not issue but upon probable cause. So something comes up. It might end up being a violation because somebody has acted as a false witness. They have made up a story about you or whatever. There's a warrant issued. Now the authorities come out. They are not trying to violate your rights. And by God, everybody, especially in government, but everybody is required to make sure you are secure in your person, houses, papers, and effects. So one of the things that should be and it's just recently happened to me. So just a quick aside, I held a meeting. I planned it, I organized it, I got a place to have the meeting. I had a meeting. It was about a political thing that was going on in town, and we decided, as a small group of us, decided we were going to have media there because we wanted media to ask to come, and they wanted to film what we were doing, and we wanted to utilize the power of the media for part of the meeting. Then we were going to make it a rule that everybody had to shut off their cameras and there was going to be no more filming, partly because it was an organization. It was an organizational meeting in part. And we wanted participation from the floor. So we didn't want to out everybody and have everybody in the world know what everybody said, because not everybody was prepared with their remarks, like those of us who spoke, because we organized the whole thing. We planned the whole thing. It was us. So we could get filmed, but they weren't gonna. Well, we had a couple of journalists, self-described, who decided that they were going to call it a public meeting and that we couldn't kick them out. And so, of course, I did. And so I'm now being sued. And this guy online, these guys online have threatened to take our house. And they have worked and are doing lawfare to try to make us afraid that we're going to lose our house. They have gone right after exactly this. They've literally, their opening statement, their submission to the court is perjured. There's very little in it that's actually true, and and he describes an incident, and it's perjury. None of it happened. And so hopefully the court will see through it. Now, those who have done things, like if the court was to issue a subpoena basically a warrant for certain things in pursuance of this case, which is only civil. Here we're talking about a criminal thing. But eventually, the hope is that the court would restore the violation of my security because this guy has misused the courts by going after us and then further tried to unhinge our mental state by threatening to take all that we have. Literally, I mean, he's literally done it online, and so this is to protect from that. Now, when a warrant issues, it has to be upon probable cause and supported by oath or affirmation. That oath or affirmation, that signed court document, um, has to have some repercussions to in order for you to, if somebody misuses it, they have to be punished so that you can be restored to your security. Because if not, then the next guy along is going to come along and do the same kind of thing, and it's going to grow and grow and grow. So the right of the people, that's each and every one of us, have the right to be secure in our persons. Now, the Fifth Amendment says no person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on presentment or indictment of grand jury. This is no individual person. It's not a blanket statement for all people, although it is. It comes down and says no person. That's all people. It just phrases it differently. And then, nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb. Supreme Court has said per sovereign. They add the two words to the end of that phrase, per sovereign, and they call the federal government a sovereign, and they call the state government a sovereign, which they are not, but they add the words. And that's why you can be you can literally be subject to the same offense twice to be in jeopardy of life or limb, once by the state, once by the feds, and that is the way governments are doing business. It's directly in violation of the Fifth Amendment. But it says again, nor shall be any person be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself. So that's all persons out there, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. So all of us must have due process of law. And that means a jury trial. And that's what we see in the Sixth, Seventh Amendments. And then we see Eighth Amendment, excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, etc., nor cruel or unusual punishments inflicted. Well, let's jump down here to the 14th Amendment. It says all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. So it's all persons. That's the same thing as saying the people, but it's all persons and it's pointing to each individual. So I hope that answers your question. I can't see the um, yes, people has let's do this. You said people has a singular, also a people, one people. Yes, but a people is a conglomeration of individual persons. That's the idea. It's in the plural, persons in the plural. All persons is people is saying all persons. It's another way of saying the same thing. I hope that shows you that we're talking about the exact same thing. Um, but I also want to point out one other thing. Let's go back to the Fourth Amendment real quick. Let me reshare that. Go back to the Fourth Amendment. And the Fourth Amendment, notice that it says the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects. When this is like saying we the people, go all the way up here to the preamble. We the people of the United States. Who is making the Constitution? We the people. You and I are persons in we the people. We the people are the ones who have done this. Who has the right in the Fourth Amendment, and who is it? It's pointing to a bigger thing in part. It's I went to the wrong section. Sorry. Hold on. I clicked on the wrong 4. Fourth Amendment, not Article 4. The right of the people. You could almost say this: the right of we the people to be secure in our persons. You could almost say it that way, and look at it as the people in general. It is declaring that the right belongs to the people. Government, you serve the people. You are below the people. You're part of the people, but you're below the people when you're in your servitude as a government agency. And so, therefore, you cannot violate the people. You can't put yourself above and violate our rights. Our rights supersede what you might want to do. You might want to bust into the, person's house. We have a right to be secure in our person's houses, papers, and effects. You have to have a warrant, specific. It can't be a general warrant like the 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 military and the agents of the king were doing back before the revolution. They were issuing general warrants. In fact, the march on Lexington and Concord was to serve a general warrant to go after shot and powder and cannon and some members of the Continental Congress and other leaders of the insurrection, or the whatever the British at that time called it. But the point was, it was a general warrant, and they were going to go generally. You can look at, you can search all the houses in Lexington and Concord, would be kind of how the warrant would read, and they would just go in, kick down your door, and start searching. They didn't have a reason to search your house other than they suspected there was stuff in town. But we were at peace. We should have been at peace. We were preparing for war. This was the kickoff of the war. They just came in and did it. Them's fighting words, if you will, or fighting actions. And obviously that's exactly what happened. And began a much bigger conflict. We were our founders were determined that wasn't going to happen again. We were going to have our rights protected. So I hope that helps. Let's see. We've got another Question. Let's do this. Do you see a difference between right and privilege? Good question. I've addressed that. Watch our other ones if you haven't seen them already, because we do talk about that. I'll deal with it again. Isn't a privilege something that can be given and withdrawn, whereas a right can never be taken away because a right is inherent and absolute. No? Excellent, excellent question. And the answer is yes and no. Now, between equals, and remember, we the people are all equals. Republican form of government, in a Republican form of government, the people are all equal person to person. We have the exact same rights, privileges, and we have the exact same immunities. Hey, you don't violate my rights, I don't violate your rights, and none of us are then held accountable uh, or punished for exercising our rights. So my right to swing my fist ends at the tip of your nose. So as long as I am swinging my fist or shooting a gun or swinging an axe or whatever, throwing an axe, whatever the thing may be, as long as I'm not violating your rights, then you and I have the right to do those things and cannot be punished. That was the way our founders originally phrased rights. Let's look at it because this is going to be our last chance to do this in the free course. $25 a month and you can get in. We'll talk about this at length all over again, and answer all the questions that can ever possibly come to mind in I mean, because you just have all the time in the world to ask all the questions. But let's take a look at this again because this is absolutely fabulous. When I saw this, it's like this the lights came on, the sky opened, and it was absolutely fabulous. So let's do this. Allow. Okay. So the way our founders phrased rights. So down here in the fourth, fifth amendments, we talk about rights. We talk about um, be deprived of life, liberty, or property. We see we have rights to religion, um, the freedom of speech, and so forth. Those are not given in the normal sense. Okay. Really go back and watch last week's episode because it will really go into the difference. It was we were talking about natural rights versus civil rights, and I talked about the Bill of Rights that we have in light of a Bill of Rights from a monarch. Okay, that's where he's giving you because he has all the power, all powers, and all right. You have nothing. He has all powers and all right, or she, and they then grant you through a Bill of Rights privilege to their power. We don't work that way in the United States of America. In our system, because we're all equal, the rights are natural. They are part and parcel of being free. And so our Bill of Rights doesn't work like one from a monarch because we aren't getting them from a well of rights, a monarch, and receiving things we don't possess. No, 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 no. Instead, we actually possess them because they are inherent to what a free person possesses. Because you're not free if you don't possess them. If somebody else possesses them and you have to get them from them, you are not free. It's that simple. Don't make it any more complex because that's what the bad guys all try to do. So let's go look at Article 4. So we're going to scroll up here to Article 4. And here in Section 2, it says the citizens of each state shall be entitled to all privileges and immunities of citizens in the several states. Now, down here in section 4, it says the United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a Republican form of government. Now, remember that Republican form of government gets us equal and free. What is a privilege of a free person? All rights. Freedom. So when it says we shall all have the same privileges and immunities, what is that privilege? Freedom and everything attending freedom. Absolute, utter freedom, limited, as Thomas Jefferson said, only by the equal rights of others. That's the limits. So what we have is here in section 2 was the original Constitutional Convention said this is all we need to say about rights, because every single right you can possibly imagine is summed up in that one little sentence. Now, others argued, nope, they're going to pervert it. It's not clear enough for we've got the charlatans out there, we've got the bad guys. They're going to lie and cheat, and they're going to lie about this statement. They're going to be like every licensing board in every state of the union and the federal government, and they're going to say a privilege is something that is granted to you by the state, because the state is sovereign, not you. That's the lie. And that's where they take it. And that's how they say, no, we have not violated the Privileges and Immunities Clause. Instead, we are granting you the privilege to drive or to possess a gun or other arms that we don't like, explosives or whatever. Not that you've done anything wrong with them or ever would do anything wrong with them, but we've decided it's not in our general interest, the welfare of everybody. We decided this for you, and so therefore we're going to say, nah, you can't do that. But then if you come and petition us, if we feel like it, we'll grant you the privilege of doing it, because it's not a right. That's what they will say. Every last one of them. You don't have the right to drive a car. You can walk where you need to get. You can ride a horse or a bike to get where you need to get. Yeah, but I got to go 150 miles and I've got only a few hours to get there. Well, if you don't have a driver's license, our grant down to you, you're not free to go and get there at your own, on your own, abiding by all the rules of the road. You're not allowed to do that. You have to get our grant of privilege first and get that little piece of plastic, carry it in the car, and do all the other things we say you got to do before you can actually exercise your liberty to go do those things. So, in reality, privileges and immunities, we were to be immune from such treatment by government. That was the immunities. The privileges were all free together, no matter the state, no matter what, and we grant to our various governments their various powers that they are to exercise on our behalf. That is the way government is supposed to be run. So, anyway, that is what the way it is. So privileges and immunities is a way of saying rights, natural rights, not just the civil rights that are the mechanisms that are created by basically the Third to the Eighth Amendments, which protect all those natural rights. It is the limit on government. You can't touch and hold them accountable without due process of law. You can't punish them. They're immune from punishment unless they've done something to harm somebody else. They've violated someone else's rights, something along those lines. And though that's where Congress and the legislatures, the state legislatures, are supposed to come in and make the regulations so that we can all exercise all of our rights, and we can um, we can be safe in that exercise. When others exercise those same rights, we're all safe. For instance, driving on the right hand side of the road. It's why we know that vaccine mandates cannot, or any other dictate from government, cannot stand. Why? Because they violate the very nature of being free. If somebody else can dictate to you, you aren't free. You are subject to that master that can issue dictates. So, this is a good point. We're not going to talk about it tonight, really. The term person is so loaded because it includes artificial persons, and they lump those together with a human. And that goes into a whole bunch of other discussion. And corporations being persons and so forth. No, in reality, not. And people, it's an end around the Constitution, um, because while corporations are just that, they're corporate bodies, they're bodies of individuals, bodies of persons, um, and so they can represent a certain number, a certain group of persons. But again, our rights are equal. A corporation, just because they have a multitude, doesn't get higher rights. No, they still have the same rights. That corporation has no greater rights or lesser rights than any other. So a single person could, if that corporation goes out and harms a single person, no other person, just a single person, that corporation has to be held accountable because they're not allowed to violate somebody's rights. So, and the people who did that in the corporation need to be held accountable. The problem is too many things have been allowed to slide rather than hold people accountable. So you get perfect example. He's no longer alive, so we can't, he can't raise too much fuss about it. Lee Iacocca used to run Ford Motor Company before he went to Chrysler. And under Lee Iacocca, Ford Motor Company, the board, I don't know if Lee Iacocca was Ford or not, but they had the Pinto. And it wasn't just the Pinto, the LTD and pickup trucks and so forth all had the same problem. They put the gas tank too far back and get into a little bit of a rear fender bender, and the whole car goes up in flames because it split the gas tank. Literally all they had to do was move the gas tank forward a little bit in front of the axle instead of behind the rear axle, and everything would have been better. Maybe a little cage. It would have cost about $1 per car to do it. And Ford Motor Company, the board made the decision to um, not to make any change, spend $1 per car, which even then, even back in 1970s, early 1970s, wasn't much. Um, uh, like $1 per car or a few dollars per, it was minimal. And instead, um, not tell anybody about the problems and just pay for the losses. So pay for all the dead people who were incinerated. They decided that was cheaper than making the dollar fix. And they literally made that calculation. And they decided it was going to be cheaper in the long run to do that. Well, those people should have been brought up on all sorts of various and sundry criminal and civil charges personally, not just the corporation being held civilly responsible, because those people who voted for that should have been held accountable for everyone else on down the road, because they didn't tell anybody. Once it was found out, PINO went away. People stopped buying it, and it went away. It stayed in the Ford LTD that became police cars, and I've known some policemen that were very badly burned, and others who died because their car was rear-ended, and the same thing happened. It was a bigger car, but still not enough to make it happen. Their pickup trucks had the same kind of a problem. The gas tank was behind the rear axle. Move it to in front of the rear axle, and everything changed. There was enough metal back there, enough crumple zone before it broke. But those people weren't held accountable. So what happens? They just taught all of corporate America you can get away with it. So we got to talk about that, but more, I think, in holding individuals accountable, and in the corporation, within the corporation itself. I think we're getting there. It's been a lot of talking and decades. I've been talking about this for decades. But I think we're starting to have people see it, and we're going to get there. I have been talking and talking and talking, and I love it. You know me, I can keep going and keep going and keep going. But I want to thank you all for joining us for our free time. Thank you for joining me here at WeThePatriotsUSA.org. Um, go to our website, sign up, give something to help someone out. Right now, we're trying to get a little girl who's been basically kidnapped by the state of Florida, from her family, try to get her back in the home with her parents, and other things that our group does. Um, we appreciate everything you do so much. Anything you can do to help, join us. $25 a month gets you into more of this kind of content. We come up with it every week, uh, and um, and so we'll have more next week. We will be continuing. Love to have you come. Check out constitutionalgrounds.com. Read the Constitution for yourself, other founding documents. See what other documents you can find elsewhere on the net. But we give you a pointer to help you get a good handle on what you should start with. Read the original documents. Don't go by what everybody says. Um, and you'll understand everything I do. I mean, that's all I did was read the original documents. But thank you guys. We will see you soon, and just keep being patriots. We really appreciate you. Be free.